Welcome everybody to HeartLand Asia Podcast series. Today we have another guest, Denys Kolesnyk. He's French national specialist in informational warfare. Hello, Denys. Welcome in Kazakhstan. Hope you liked Almaty. You liked our cuisine. You liked our city. I would like you to introduce yourself. What do you do? What's your area of interest? And a couple of words where you're from, where you're originally from. Yes, please.
So, first of all, thank you very much for this kind invitation. And indeed, Kazakhstan is actually I'm the first time here, and very good impressions. And thank to you as well. As for me, I was born in Ukraine, in West Ukraine, and I'm French. So I have Ukrainian and Polish roots, as we say, background. Professionally speaking, I'm, academically speaking, I have master's degree from Paris 2 Panthéon-Assas in international relations, and I'm actually currently pursuing as well a PhD in communication science, working on the disinformation issues. And professionally speaking, I'm a consultant. I'm mostly working as an intelligence analyst, but with a, let's say, particular focus on information sphere and information warfare.
Thank you so much. First question. I always ask my guests, what is the perspective of France toward the Kazakhstan? For Kazakhs, we believe that I think all nations in the world, they believe they're in the center. They're so important. Ask any country, they're in a pivot, they're in the center, they're in a focal point, etc.
Heartland.
Yes, all countries in the world, to some extent, are heartlands, yeah? What is general view of, let's say, on a high level in a foreign policy, what is Kazakhstan to France? And what is, if generally speaking about business in France, how do they see the Kazakhstan?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would split the question on two. So, for example, if we will be talking about the government and business circles, so with regard to the governmental affairs and the bilateral affairs, I would say that we have a strategic partnership with Kazakhstan. So it's a solid document. And there is no problem, let's say, between the vision of Paris regarding Kazakhstan. The business circles as well are quite interested in your country because your country is quite rich in natural resources, and there is, for example, Total that is working here. And Kazakhstan is the main partner of France in the region, with the, if I'm not mistaken, with the economic cooperation and trade steadily growing. But with regard to, let's say, general population, it's a bit more complicated because, let's say, Kazakhstan is quite far. The flight was like around 8 hours. So to come here, I took 8 hours. So not everybody would actually go, just with regard to the geographical distance. And historically speaking, France has always been mostly, I would say, looking into the south. So Mediterranean Sea, Northern Africa, and Africa. Currently, the situation, let's say, starting from the Russian invasion of Ukraine of 2022, the situation is changing. So France is giving much more prerogative and attention to Central Eastern Europe. And we were talking actually about it with you yesterday. So France is much more focused on European affairs, but Kazakhstan is, let's say, from the professional perspective, is quite an interesting country, both speaking with regard to the business and politically as well.
Very interesting. You mentioned that, France focus goes not narrows, but shifts toward the East Europe because of the war in Ukraine and the issues is going on. But we also hear that Europe Union and European countries, let's say West, collective West, experiencing disruption. So when we say like Europe Union, it is not that united Europe that used to be. And what are the disruptions?
Yeah, first of all, to say that there is a collective West, it's the phrase also that I use, but in the reality it's difficult to say that there is a collective West, because every country is guided by its own interests, even though, yes, we have the framework like NATO, and it's another topic, maybe we'll talk about it later.
Definitely will.
But for example, with regard to the European Union, indeed, there are common policies, common objectives, but even within those common objectives, it is a fight between the countries to advance their own agendas as well. And there are questions of the funding, there are questions of foreign policy, because obviously for Spain, the priorities would be much more different than for Poland, and for France, the priorities as well are different than for Italy, for example. So I would be quite cautious when using this phrase collective West, but due to this divergence and the different threats, for example, the migration that is coming from Africa through Sahel and then through Spain or through Italy, farther to Europe, and then even to London, to the United Kingdom, and also, for example, the Russian threat that is in the eastern part of Europe. So a lot of different threats create the divergence as well, because it is difficult to. The threat perception is quite important, and for example, if you're in Estonia or in Poland, the threat perception is much more different than when you are in Lisbon or Madrid. It is obvious, I guess.
Would you say there are certain state groups in European Union, like?
Yeah, sure. For example, we can say that within the European Union there are some countries who have more, let's say, similar interests. And here we can talk about, for example, Czech Republic. We can talk about Poland. We have the bloc of the Baltic states. We have also the Nordic countries, the Nordic Baltic countries, as we say. So they share the common interest. But with regard to the big players, for example, France, Germany, it used to be the United Kingdom before Brexit. Even though the big lines, I would say, are more or less agreed by all countries, but at the same time, there is a rivalry. Even if, for example, I will give you an example. In France, we say couple franco-allemand, which in English translates as Franco-German couple. Nobody uses this word in Germany, for example. And speaking about the groupings as well, I would say that one of the most, in my opinion, crucial groups that has been underexploited but is taking some traction today is the Weimar Triangle. It's Poland, Germany, and France. And today, France is an important military power and political power. Poland is a military power and rising economy, and which means will become politically as well more and more important. And there is a Germany, an industrial and economic powerhouse. So the three countries should be working much closer together, and that would benefit the European Union and the European Union cohesion. But yet again, every country has their own interests, and it's not always easy to find the common ground with regard to certain policies.
Look, like very classic. There is a threat, threat creates alliances, very classic international relations concept, There is a threat, there is a big war going on in Ukraine. But like we see among European countries, NATO members, there is disagreement, but it like logically, by these theories, international relation theories, rational theories, it's supposed to, bond Europe together. Why at such crucial point there is disruption? Why they're not? So for my logic, it should be vice versa. They should be at this time as united as possible, rather than let's say 10 years before or any other time of period when after the collapse of Soviet Union or any other time. Any explanation of that?
I guess you're talking about, for example, about Slovakia and Hungary before the recent elections. That's what you mean about the disruptions?
Hungary, let's say Slovakia, yeah, the comments, yeah, of the head of state, and we and United States, the
But
action
they're not part of Europe.
but they're part of NATO, let's say.
Euro-Atlantic space.
Euro-Atlantic space, exactly. Or let's say we see that Spain, Italy is not also active. It's that much being, part of this idea, balancing Russia.
Yeah, let's say if we will be talking about, it's purely my vision, if we'll be talking about Hungary and Slovakia, so there are different lenses through which we could read the positions of those countries. And without going, into the conspiracy theories or whatsoever, I would say that Hungary experienced the Soviet occupation, and I think under Orban, for example, they really wanted the war to stop really quickly, and whatever cost for Ukraine, because I guess nobody would care in Budapest, because just there was this fear of having the Russian soldiers again somewhere near. In my opinion, something similar can be applicable to Slovakia, for example. But there is another layer. I'm not sure whether you followed, but recently there was an information published in the media that actually the information, the recording of conversation between former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Hungary, Szijjártó, and Russia's Lavrov, and basically where Szijjártó was saying that we will do whatever is necessary. We will help Lavrov, because Lavrov asked him to help some person. I don't remember already the context, but there was this idea to somehow appease or to have some good relations with Russia. Yet again, I don't want to go into the conspiracy theories, because maybe there were some other interests, I would say personal interests, but I will not develop it because I have absolutely no information about it. Speaking about more globally, if we talk about the Euro-Atlantic space, let's say the United States' new national security strategy has completely outlined the interest of the United States that lies in the Western Hemisphere, and Europe lies in Eastern Hemisphere. This also somehow supports this long-standing idea of the US disengagement from Europe, from the European affairs, and that the defense burden should be more shared much more by the Europeans than the Americans. So I guess it also somehow logical and partly explains the absence of this unity, let's say. But with regard to Russia, for example, there is unity, because everybody understands that this country, as of today, maybe in 20 years it would be different, but as of today, Russia represents a threat, a direct threat. When Russians are carrying out some military exercises in Belarus, for example, so indeed people in Poland are afraid. And even though we don't feel it in France, but strategically speaking, we're also somehow cautious about what Russians could do, whether we would need to react, whether we would be able to react accordingly. So I wouldn't say that there is no unity with this regard, but I would say that also every country obviously is guided by own interests, and some countries do not see that there is a necessity to be involved, let's say, at 100%, and some countries think that being involved at 50% in this it's also okay. Not every country also have the same financial situations, also explains partially. And the European countries are democracies, which means mostly 5-year term and 5-year logic. And for example, in France, we'll be having presidential and legislative elections in 2027. In Poland, there will be elections, and in different countries. And it also explains, because when there is a shift of governments, so the priorities may also shift. But I would say the general line is supported by everybody. But when you start to go deeply into it, so it's in the details that there may be divergences. I'm not sure whether it answers to your question, but Maybe you would precise.
So, okay, if for example France, if in France election wins Marine Le Pen, like she becomes the prime minister of the.
She cannot.
Why?
Because there was a ruling against her, and she was sentenced. And during 5 years, she has no right to occupy public offices, which means she cannot be a candidate for presidency.
Okay, any any political member from alternative party becomes president of France. Would be there like clear change in foreign policy, in European policy?
I would tell you this. As of today, the Rassemblement National Party, Marine Le Pen's party, but she will not be candidate, and Jordan Bardella will be the candidate for presidency. And so the party as of today is supported by roughly between 30 and 35% of voters, which means that if everything goes the same way, and next year, before the election, so more or less, Rassemblement National will have the majority at the parliament. Maybe not decisive, but still majority. Which means if they will they will have the decisive majority, so they will form the government. If they will have simple majority, they will compose with ally with some other political parties, for example, maybe Les Républicains, or maybe some individual deputies. So let's see. But as you know, in France, the key person that is responsible for foreign policy is president, and that is why it is important to understand who will become president. And different speculations can be done. I don't want to go deeply into it, but I would say potentially if we have the Rassemblement National government and Rassemblement National president, it is possible that France will be much more cautious with regard to, for example, containing Russia, or maybe even would consider disengagement from certain NATO structures. It is possible. It is not yet clear, but it is possible.
Interesting, very interesting. Denys, you are a specialist in informational warfare. Yeah. So I'm not sure. Like you touch only Europe, or like you specialize on a bigger picture. What countries would you say are good, like top 5, top 3 countries in terms of protecting their information domain?
I would say we have to start to define maybe what is information domain or information sphere, because it is, on one hand, it's difficult to define because the information is flowing, and I would even say it differently. If we talk about internet and social media, it is not the national sovereignty that plays the role, but rather, I would say, language. So you can have in your country people who speak, for example, I will give you an example. So in France, I guess everybody know we have important percentage of population who are either Arab speaking, or from Arab countries or Maghreb countries, who are citizens or not citizens. It doesn't really matter with this regard, but who consume content. And not necessarily a part of these people will be consuming the content in French language, or the French media, if you want. So it can be French content from the Maghreb countries, from Maghreb media. It can be Arabic content from not the France 24 or some other media, but from, for example, I don't know, national Algerian broadcaster.
Which could be in French language.
It is in French, it is in Arabic, indeed. So, or I'm not a specialist in Kazakhstan, but I mostly work on the European cases. But I would say in Kazakhstan you have de facto 2 languages. You have the Kazakh language and you have the Russian language. And you have the content in Kazakh language and in Russian language. But you also have the content in Russian language produced by Russians. you can also consume the content in Russian produced by Ukrainians as well, which means
which makes us very vulnerable to information warfare.
With this regard, indeed, because let's say if we would say that Russia is, not we would say, but Russia is waging information warfare, and to go and to talk to some parts of the population in France, they can simply go through the Maghreb media, for example. And I will explain how it works. It's actually quite easy.
Very interesting.
I will explain how it works.
Never thought about this.
It actually quite interesting, because the Russian channels like Russia Today, like Sputnik, other outlets, they create their own unique content and they share it. So, for example, media from Morocco or Tunisia or Algeria can simply borrow the content, like the video, and write an article. And this article will be read in the region and potentially also for people living in France.
And Algeria and Russia in very good relations.
And by the way, Algeria and Russia have some quite more than cordial relations, I would say. And with regard to Kazakhstan, there is no even need to do this, because people in Kazakhstan can just go through the social media and by default read the Russian news or the content that was specifically created for the Kazakh population, but there is no need to pass through somebody else, So it is a quite complex question indeed with regard to what we say, the national information sovereignty. With regard to your question about who would be the top three, I tend to believe that in France we had quite a huge progress in recent years. Maybe since 2021-22 we had quite a good progress with the establishment of different bodies that aim to protect for example, information space, that who actually, for example, like Viginum, whose role is to analyze the potential foreign information interferences. So it doesn't concern, for example, not necessarily concern a person who would be a blogger, a French blogger, but it rather concerns the activities carried out by the foreign states in the French information domain.
So technically, if they see the blogger who is funded by foreign government to produce some content,
anti-French content, for example.
Anti-French
yes,
content.
example. So it can be it can be considered indeed if there is a trail of money. So it can be considered as a coordinated for foreign interference or a coordinated information attack. If you have a different kind of actors involved spreading, for example, the same narratives, and there were a lot of different narratives during the Olympic Games, for example, but the majority of the Russo-French information warfare, I would say, is fought in Africa, because it's where Russia was quite active and quite successful with regard to damaging France and French interests. And going back again to Kazakhstan, from what I know, yet again, I'm not an expert in Kazakhstan, but from what I know, your country doesn't have any bodies who would be tasked to protect the electoral process, for example, from the information standpoint, or who would be tasked to constantly analyze what is happening in the Kazakh sphere of internet, or with regard to social media, for example. And I guess this kind of organs and institutions should be created, and because in France we have the attribution, so we say, okay, we have gathered the evidence, so this attack was Russian, and we have gathered evidence, and this attack was Turkish, for example, or Azerbaijani, or whatever country, or Chinese. In Kazakhstan, with regard to political situation and a geopolitical, even I would say, situation, it would be maybe more difficult to do this, but at least what is necessary is to understand what actors are playing against you in your information space.
I think, there are some mechanism and bodies that do that job, but like as you mentioned, to make that attribution especially public, well, it will definitely create some geopolitical problems. But like, if you, I don't know if you are familiar or not. My students yesterday tried to deliver this as well. Kazakhs in Kazakhstan we have something like national territorial guerrilla warfare in the comments, in social media, and when there are attacks on Kazakh language, Kazakh culture, there is a mobilization in the comments, and we write a lot of negative comments. We send a lot of warnings, that this page, shows some, discriminative content, etc., in order to ask let it be Instagram or Facebook to ban this page. Yeah, and such public activity exists in Kazakhstan, which is quite interesting phenomenon, I would say. People would tag each other saying that, oh, you see, there is problem, let's attack, let's do that, etc. Yeah, but yeah, there is no like public attribution, there is no that such let's say independent body that will do the investigation and publicly declare the attribution. Also, Denys, I'm always, how to say, I don't have answer to that to myself, but I'm always philosophizing. If you are familiar with 1984, George Orwell's idea of anti-utopia, yeah, Big Bro is watching you, yeah, the famous one. I really, Denys, sometimes think that George Orwell meant authoritarian states, and sometimes I think he meant democratic states. So sometimes when I see democratic regimes, democratic countries, how in what level their media is developed and how they manipulate the narratives. Yes, it's open. Yes, there's more freedom, but also there is more money. There are more independent journalists and a lot of different narratives. And among this narrative, one narrative wins. Do you understand? Well, in authoritarian countries, there is one narrative, there is one line, general line, and there is a repressive apparatus. If you don't follow that, they will repress you. So, like,
The balance.
Who needs more, this war, the narrative, democratic states or authoritarian? So, what do you think? Whom George Orwell, what was his, what kind of society he was writing about, democratic or authoritarian one?
He was writing about an utopian society. It's a polite way to put it, but indeed, even the democratic societies, they have there is also always the risk of sliding into the authoritarian-like regimes. And for example, what we were observing in Hungary. So in Hungary, were such quite bad processes happening during the years where the country was moving away from democracy. And if we look the Freedom House publications, they every year they publish this index, democracy, if I'm mistaken, it's democracy and freedom, something like this index. And we observe from year to year, the less countries, actually the more countries become either in between. So not purely democratic regimes, but not authoritarian regimes, but something in between. And so there is a decline in what they called democracy. If your country is a democratic country, it doesn't mean that everything is allowed, especially with regard to foreign powers. Because as you know, information warfare, Russians call it information struggle or something like this. There are different terms and definitions, but it is a part of competition between the states, and even sometimes it is a part of war, and non-kinetic war, non-kinetic conflict. So even if you're a democratic state or democratic country, you cannot just let everybody get engaged and tell whatever they want, because it is literally quite easy to stir up public unrest by simply channeling certain narratives over time. And it is scientifically proven if you would repeat something over a long period of time, people actually would start to believe this. And what we were observing in Africa, for example, is that Russians were simply paying and orchestrating the anti-French manifestations, which means a country cannot let another country instrumentalize its own population. Or also we know, for example, in 2014, Russians were also orchestrating the manifestations in Ukraine and portraying this as this so-called anti-governmental manifestations or pro-Russian manifestations. So the idea is that the democracy should be well defended and well guarded, but the question is, where are the limits? And in my opinion, it's also quite a debatable question. And citizens should be able to criticize the government, but the foreign power shouldn't be able to influence this citizen.
Absolutely agree.
So I guess that's somehow we should draw the limit. If it is a citizen who has his own opinion, his own voice, he has the right to say this. If it is a blogger who takes money from just a random country, I don't know, let's say Brazil or whatever, so the government should be observing it, watching, and if the information operations become really harmful and impactful, there should be some sanctions, or indeed there should be some sanctions and some actions done against this kind of actors. But indeed, it's always there always should be a balance between.
Yeah, absolutely agree. That's why the attribution is important. Yeah, that's why the attribution is important. I'm international security instructor. That's my major, and I teach here as well international relations, the international security as a part of the international relations, and we always discuss two wars America done, like in Vietnam and Desert Storm, Iraqi Freedom. Desert Storm and Vietnam is very interesting case to compare. During the Vietnam, they failed their information propaganda. I would say on international level they failed. They could not support that narrative that what they're doing in Vietnam, and they understood their mistakes. And during the Desert Storm, they prepared very well, and that was the operation where these ideas of precision striking, surgical operation, that narratives appeared. But there was never surgical operation or precision striking. Civilians, the damaged, killed, people suffered. There were a lot of bombings, a lot of not precise striking. But if you could sail this narrative, you could win. And if you win on information level, it's like people consume this and they would accept this and they will leave there's a storm. It was very clear. Surgical operation. It's not like the mess like in Iran, what's going on right nowadays. And I think that access, it's my personal opinion, access to social media for random population changed, this easily portrayed narrative of, surgical strike, the precision striking. I have read a report, I would say, in 2014, like 12 years ago. I guess it was Oxford Analytica's report. It was a very interesting report. There was small fight between Hamas and Israel, one of the random their fights. And what Oxford Analytica found out is that Hamas using hashtags in Twitter, in Facebook, in other accounts, in other platforms, first time in their history, they did not lose information war with Israelis. because they portrayed what Israel has done, they published the pictures, etc. And I think it was the era where the information was, when people started going online during the bombing, during the attack, showing the damage, where this myth about the surgical operation, precision striking, was debunked at all. And nowadays to support this narrative is very difficult. We are doing very anti-terrorist operation there, but indeed people can show, and publish. Would you say that social media is a big challenge to support this government narrative?
Actually, this is an amazing question, and when you were giving this example about the Desert Storm, I thought that, well, you cannot apply the same to today, because today you have the easy access to internet and smartphones and cameras and videos, etc. I would say that, I wouldn't say that it became more difficult. I would say that the governments today, they are just thinking differently as well. So if you're carrying out a military operation and you know that there are tons of people with smartphones, internet access, and they will be posting it, publishing it. So even if you say it was surgical, well, everybody would see what happened, for example, in Mariupol when Russians bombed the theater where the kids were staying. It was in 2022, or 2022, I think. So you cannot sell this and saying, okay, well, we are doing surgical strikes. But the narrative is different. So, for example, you will not be selling the narrative of surgical strikes, but you would sell the narrative of Ukrainian Nazis, for example. Or you would say the narrative of the, decline in West, or the gay West, as they say. In Russia, they say the gay Europa, they say in the Russian language. And so actually the narratives, they have changed, but still, I would say there are meta-narratives, which are the narratives that are constant. It's, for example, the West is bad, NATO is bad, and this narrative will be repeated over the years and tens of years in all different medias. And there are also the so-called, I call them ad hoc narratives. And those narratives are precisely tailored to this or that situation. For example, elections, some strikes, some random, some events in your country. For example, if Kazakhstan would organize, some international conference here, so there would be, for instance, and if it challenges the interest of Russia or China or some other actors, so potentially there could be narratives that would go against this event, and they would be tailored to hurt this event. And coming back to the information warfare, as you said, Hamas won it, and I would disagree with you, and I would say that you cannot win the information warfare, because the information warfare is something that is constantly ongoing. It's not like a kinetic armed conflict that started on 1st of September in 39, and ended, for example, on 23rd of September, 1960, for example. There is no time frame. And that is why I'm not saying that a country can win. I remember when
I said, I didn't say, Oxford Analytica wrote, Hamas didn't lose. First time, didn't lose.
Okay, so I understand, but I would still disagree. So maybe if we just take, as a researchers, for example, if we take a certain time frame, so yes, we can analyze it and say, okay, from this to this point, like the narratives spread by this or that power were successful or unsuccessful. But I remember, in 2023, for example, in France, different experts and colleagues and just people and media were saying that, Ukraine won the information warfare. Ukraine didn't win the information warfare. Ukraine won the phase of the first phase, I would say, informational phase of the first phase of the armed conflict between Russia and Ukraine. So it is impossible to win the information warfare. You can just be successful at one time and unsuccessful another time.
You can assess one period.
Yes, exactly.
One period of time.
Only of certain period of time can be assessed.
Interesting, very interesting. If we can talk about NATO, disruption at NATO.
Oh, well, you like this word today, disruption.
But like, Denys, openly, I would say, like, the European Union, NATO. So there is perspective from Kazakhstan. We try to analyze this blocks. We took as not only we, but I would say European Union was a model for a number of regions in the world, like African Union, ASEAN, I guess, took as a model the South America, like Mercosur, the other different organizations. They would take it as a model, to how to create a regional security community, regional trade community, etc., 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 and NATO as well. But like nowadays, we see like the Sweden and Finland joined NATO, but now other countries are not like satisfied with NATO joint activity. And why so?
Well, as we all know, when I was a young student, I had this trip to NATO headquarters in Brussels, and that was a period when it was 2008, if I remember well, maybe 9. And at that period, NATO was trying to invent the tasks for itself. So, there was a Afghanistan mission, but NATO was trying, let's say, to find tasks for itself and to justify why this organization still should exist. Later on, after 2014, after actually 2008 and mostly from 2014, there was an understanding that, okay, there are some powers, for example, Russia, who is okay with using forces and occupying foreign land and challenging the international world order. And NATO started to, let's say, there was the understanding that NATO is still necessary organization as a defensive bloc. But as of today, as I have already mentioned, for example, the United States' priority is the Western Hemisphere, at least under Trump administration. With regard to the different European NATO allies, it's also different. The perception is also different, as I said. For the Portuguese, well, okay, Russia is a threat to NATO and to European Union and to Europe as a whole, but it is difficult, due to the geographical distance, it is difficult for Portuguese to say, well, Russia is an immediate threat to us, while for Estonians it is, and for Poles it is. With regard to the so-called, as you say, this disruption, so I would link it to two things, because on one part, with current U.S. administration, it is quite difficult, and there are voices who ask questions, and questions like whether the United States would honor the Article 5, so the clause for mutual defense, if there would be a necessity for this call. There is also, let's say, different discussions, and here I could talk about France, that you remember when Emmanuel Macron first term, he was advocating for a stronger Europe, because indeed, I guess, and we can talk about the Gaullism and our history.
It's when Trump, tweeted for his tweet saying that when Macron mentioned, it's time to have a European army, and Trump retweeted or wrote the comment like, when Americans came to save France in Paris, French were learning the German that era, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, so 2016, 17. If I didn't follow this exact tweet, but it was 2017. Yes, Emmanuel Macron.
So what I'm mentioning, yeah, there was a period like for stronger Europe, but also that's something US didn't like. I didn't understand.
Yes.
Like,
Yes, I would try to
Yeah.
explain it briefly. So the Emmanuel Macron's idea at that period it was more less reliance on NATO and building more capacities within the European Union, and this autonomie stratégique that was also replicated on the applied to the European level, to the European Union level. But when you talk about that period of time, this idea, the French idea, it wasn't well perceived in Central Eastern European countries because Central Eastern European countries felt the immediate threat from Russia, while France was trying to, in the eyes of Central European Union and Central European NATO states, France, in their eyes, was well too complacent with Russia, so not a hardliner against Russia, while they relied a lot on the United States and believed in the United States guarantees more than in NATO guarantees or European Union guarantees, because within the European Union we also have the clause of mutual defense. With the current period of time, Donald Trump supported Israel and attacked Iran. It also goes against the interests of different European countries. What is happening today goes against economic interest of the European countries because the trade through the Hormuz Strait actually harmed the Europeans because we were losing money simply, and Donald Trump expected us to come and support him, but why? So when an ally, the United States, with this regard, acts on its own without consulting NATO member states, and moreover, NATO's task is to protect the Euro-Atlantic space and to protect its member states. As we all know, Iran didn't attack the United States, so there was no event of engaging Article 4 consultations, Article 5 mutual defense. So what I'm trying to say here is that. And when the United States also spoke about the decreased support for NATO and that the Europeans should spend more money and to be more responsible for their own defense, which is, in my opinion, actually quite normal and necessary in the current situation. So why to keep investing in NATO? So maybe it's a good way indeed to be more serious about building European Union capacities and actually focusing on Europe, because who knows, maybe tomorrow Donald Trump would decide, and I'm speculating, but who knows, maybe tomorrow Donald Trump would just decide to stop to provide guarantees to NATO states or something else. So nobody knows actually, and even nobody knows at 100% what would happen if a NATO country is under aggression, whether the allies would come to help or not. So it's still, because it hasn't been tested. The Article 5 was engaged only once when the United States suffered from the 9/11 attack.
Yes.
It was the only case where the Article 5 was engaged. So it hasn't been tested. It hasn't been tested against nuclear power like Russia, for example, or it hasn't been tested with regard to China. So a lot of questions arise, but at the same time we still have European Union. So why not to maybe invest more in this and try to be more European among us Europeans?
So would you say there is a trajectory in Europe for stronger Europe in terms of security providing?
I would put it this way, indeed, that if during the first term of Emmanuel Macron's presidency, like half of Europe was quite skeptical, today the skepticism fades away, and there is a growing understanding that maybe it would be indeed better to be, let's say, to develop the European defense. And France is doing a lot. And a few months ago, Emmanuel Macron unveiled the new nuclear strategy. And under this strategy, we will be able to, for example, in an event of a threat, immediate threat, we would be able to deploy our Rafale aircraft with the nuclear warheads to Poland, for example. And that could be quite a serious signal we're talking about Russia because Russia is a threat to Europe. And it could be a strong signal to Russia, and also it could be a strong signal to the Europeans that France is, as the only country, nuclear country in the European Union, is serious as well about extending the guarantees toward the other members. So I guess in order to make this European defense happen, we really need at least 3 countries working closely on it. We need France as a nuclear power state. We have Germany as the economic center, and we need Poland as a NATO frontier state and more and more economically important and more militarily important as well.
Turkey is not there. Turkey is not there.
It's Turkey is a NATO member, indeed, we all know, but Turkey is not a member of the European Union. So by default, Turkey cannot be part of this situation. On the other hand, in the event of different situations, we all know that in international affairs and in history, there are different cases of countries uniting and this so-called coalition of willing being created, which means, who knows, maybe if there is the European powerhouse, military powerhouse, maybe Turks would join some parts of it, maybe not. I mean, it's still very speculative. And a lot of things we've just discussed are speculative because we don't know how the future will unfold.
Or right wings could win the party, the election, and it could go very different direction. Yeah.
Exactly, indeed. For example, if in 2027 we have a completely different government and there is a will to withdraw from NATO military command, so it may happen.
Denys, I would ask you to do your 3-4 forecasts for the Europe in terms of defense and security.
It's quite difficult to forecast anything, to be honest, with this quite rapidly changing world, with the events unfolding every day. Things change. They can go 180 degrees in a different way. But I would say that there is an appetite for a stronger Europe, so the stronger European Union, stronger Europe. I would say there is also an understanding that the European Union cannot be efficient in a way it works today and cannot take new member states because it needs to be, in future more, I guess we will be moving towards the different layers of the European Union integration. So maybe a 2-speed or 3-speed Europe with one countries, the unity of countries, and the countries decide to what extent they want to be engaged with different rights and different obligations. It is a possibility in my opinion. And I would also say that militarily speaking, I tend to believe that we will see mostly the smaller alliances, because smaller alliances are more efficient and more agile alliances. And so maybe within even this future European Union defense structure, maybe we would see a block of 3-4 states that would have even stronger military cooperation than on a general level. So I guess, for example, Poland would be closely cooperating with Czech Republic, with Slovakia, with Hungary, maybe the Baltic states, and maybe the Baltic states and the Nordic countries would cooperate even more with regard to defense. And France, for example, would stay either alone or would cooperate on a bigger level with Germany. Again, speculating, but I think from the military, from the threat perception standpoint and answering to this threat perception, it is easier to find the common ground with smaller actors, because when you have 30 actors, it's one thing. When you have 2 or 3 actors, it's another thing. So I guess we will see the emergence of the so-called smaller alliances with the bigger European Union military structures that I hope we will see in future, because it's still in the interest of
Like Visegrad, like Nordic countries.
Yes, exactly. Maybe it could be Visegrad 4 minus somebody. It not necessarily can be applied to the current formats, but just on the like bilateral or trilateral level, for example, and to have like even more extended guarantees within the few states, and it would be potentially even easier to achieve without trying to get along and to find consensus among all European Union member states. Yet again, speculating, but it is
very interesting.
It is a possibility, and maybe it is also the way to think forward.
Very interesting. Thank you so much. Also, Denys, I always ask my guests, a couple of books you would like to recommend to my students, to my followers, to public. It could be anything: fiction, strategy, communication, international relations.
Honestly speaking, I would recommend.
But please, without French accent, try to make it
Yes,
very English way.
Okay, so I would recommend The Prince of Machiavelli. It is important in this period of time to read it again if somebody didn't read it. I would also recommend to read again for those who didn't to read again for those who already read it, the Leviathan of Hobbes.
Nice choice.
In my opinion, very strong and landmark book. And speaking of the third one, I would recommend. I was reading something recently, and I would maybe go with the third pick. I'm quite puzzled, to be honest, what to recommend as a third book to you with regard to foreign affairs or security and defense, but maybe one of the books on strategy, on military strategy, for example, I would go with. I would say this, yeah. So no third title for you.
Thank you so much, Denys.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming, sharing your time with us. Hope you enjoyed your stay in Almaty. You enjoyed Narxoz University. Thank you, everybody, for watching podcast HeartLand. Big thanks to Narxoz University for giving us a platform to record podcasts, to host such guests, to bring them, to give public lectures, podcasts to students, to our audience, international audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you.